Brent Porcia of TopVelocity.net. Going to do a pitching analysis here of this young man using ProPlayAI. This is an app, also with a desktop access. If you'd like to get access to it, we have even a discount code at TopVelocity. Go to ProPlayAI.com. Use our discount code TopVelocity. It's a great app that takes video and gives you biomechanical information. So coming out of leg lift, we'll stop him right before back leg drive. Okay, so you can see the software here is mapping his movements. It has a two-dimensional rig here, tracking all kinds of things like Kinematic Sequence, which is a big one we're going to use today, angles, speeds of movements, gives you good descriptions of what everything stands for. I'm just going to use some of the visuals today and some of the Kinematic Sequence information to give you a good analysis. So you can see at this point he's very extended with his front leg. So his front leg is too far ahead, and that's going to pull him off the rubber early. And the problem is going to be it's going to take away his back leg, the only leg on the ground's ability to power hip rotation. We have studies that show that back leg drive has, or the ground forces of the back leg, have a big impact on the angular impulse, or the rotational forces going forward. So if your front leg is this far out in front, so extended in front, that means the front leg can influence rotation of the hip, but not going to be as effective as the back leg, mainly because your front leg has to land closed, right? We know it has to land closed so when your hip comes around, it stabilizes your pelvis before trunk rotation, and that pelvis is squared up to the target. So if we had landed open, then our pelvis can over rotate, and then we start to fall off the target, and then we can start missing glove side. Either way, it's going to take us away from the precision of everything moving squared and towards the target. So what we typically do, but to land closed, we have to use the back leg to drive rotation. That's why the studies show it's more effective in powering angular impulse. So what we're seeing, because he's so extended with his front leg, and his back leg is being pulled now into rotation early because of it, which we see the back knee turning down, this is going to affect hip rotation speeds going to front foot strike. So if we take him to front foot strike, we already see that this pelvis line here is turning red, and that's what the software does to tell you that you're starting to pick up your speeds, or you're getting close to your peaks. But it's kind of like a pink. It's not a full red because it's not fully peaked at this point. And if we go down here and we look at the kinematic sequence, this is when things are going off. Where, like, for example, the pelvis is the dotted blue line. That's telling us, okay, what's the speeds of the pelvis? The pink or the orange line is the torso, the green is the elbow, the yellow is the shoulder of the throwing arm. So we can see, okay, what's moving the fastest at these certain points. Okay, so you can see before we go into, this is more than likely pitch release, this line here. I believe, might show it over here. Yep, see foot plant is the first line. The second one is the last one is ball release. The middle one is maximum external rotation. So this is maximum external rotation, this is foot plant, and this is ball release. You can see just before maximum external rotation, which would be at the point his arm lays back, which is right here. I jumped ahead a little bit too much. See if we can get it exactly to there. Kind of jumping somewhere around here. Okay, there it is, maximum external rotation. That's going to be right here. And if I put the kinematic sequence there, I can see torso rotation is the highest peak. The reason the shoulder and external rotation is negative because it's counter rotating. It's loading back, so it's not accelerating at this point. And that's shoulder internal and elbow extension. That's counter rotating. So if you look at pelvis rotation, it's at 283, and then torso rotation is at 661, and that's going to be degrees per second. And those are pretty slow speeds, specifically for torso rotation. So once again, something's happened to where there's not a good acceleration of energy moving up the body at this point. So if we go a little bit before that, about right here, we should see, or just before front strike, we should see the pelvis rotation peaking. And you can actually see back here the torso speeds are still higher, all the way back to actually, no, I was wrong. This is foot plant. Let me just go back to here again. Yeah, foot plant. So if we went right here, I should have been right here, not up here to extra maximum external rotation, we'd see torso rotation is higher than pelvis rotation. And once again, the arms in counter rotation. We should see somewhere around here the pelvis rotation is higher. So we have an issue here. I'm still going back and the pelvis rotation is still lower. That means the trunk is moving earlier and faster than the pelvis. We don't want that to happen until after front foot strike. So if I go here and I look at that moment where we talked about where the front leg gets too extended, the torso is moving as faster than the trunk or the hip rotation right now. So as you can see, we move forward, the torso is the more dominant mover, even as we go into landing. Even though you see that you know, this is saying it's peaking, but it doesn't mean it's peaking faster than this torso. That's just depending on what point in time did it hit its highest speeds is starting to happen. But the torso, we can see, is now moving ahead of it. This is really much closer to front foot strike right here, which is probably where it does start to even out. We can see pelvis and torso speeds are the same, but still the pelvis speed should be by far the highest at this point. And then we go forward into front foot or just after front foot right here, somewhere just this is maximum external rotation, so it's gonna be right here. We can see that the torso speeds are at the highest, which is what it should be, but the peak of the torso speeds are way back here before maximum external rotation. So what we have is the trunk going early, which means that the hips are failing to push energy, so the trunk has to start early to overcompensate. And then we see the point of maximal external rotation, we're running out of trunk energy, as you can see it going down, and now the arm starts to come into play. So now if we have the trunk a good tenth of a second losing energy before the arm is initiated, the arm's going to have to overcompensate. So we need to go back to front foot strike, or just before front foot strike, and we need to address why did the energy shut off, okay? And ultimately, it's because the lift leg was allowed to get away, pull away, and take over transferring energy. We don't want that. We want the lift leg to be close to the body, closed, and allow the back leg to force an impulse of rotational power, forcing the momentum to transfer to the front leg. So the front leg is trying to do the work that the back leg should be doing. If we did that at front foot strike, you'd have a lot higher amount of pelvis energy than you do here. You'd have it considerably higher than the torso energy. You'd have more separation here between the hips and shoulders, which you can see they're pretty synced up at this point. And therefore we'd have a higher release of torso energy, and more than likely that energy would peak closer to maximum external rotation, which we can see it isn't. And then we'd see more energy going forward. And the other things we'd see is at front foot strike, we'd see at release more than likely a more extended front leg. And why do we get to this bent front leg? Because if the lift leg is kicking so far away and ultimately leaving the back hip and back leg behind, which would kill the hip rotation power, it also leaves the back hip behind the trunk as the trunk goes forward. And when that happens, your front leg stays bent. If the back hip was more open and forward and pulled away from the torso, not only you have more hip to shoulder separation, but you'd have a position to where as the trunk goes forward, the front leg now can extend back. Because you can't extend the front leg back with the hips closed. The front leg extending is supported by the hips continuing to rotate arm side. So he would have a much better finish as well with front leg extending and pushing more energy up if the back hip wasn't left behind and that lift leg didn't disrupt the energy by transferring early and getting out early. So the other things you can see too, as we saw the pelvis slowly peaking into landing. We see the torso now peaking. You see the line across the chest. It peaked somewhere back right here. Okay, you can see it peaking right here. You should see the forearm rotating, or the humerus right here peaking. The problem is we're seeing it peaking with the elbow in front of the face. That's the lack of energy that was pushed up, meaning if more energy would have been pushed up, if this torso would have continued to peak into maximum external rotation, this arm would have turned over faster, because that's what happens when you push more energy through the arm. It rotates earlier. So when we see an arm rotating late, that means not a lot of energy was pushed to it, causing the arm to be late to rotate, forcing the arm to create more energy into rotation, putting more stress and more torques on the arm. And we have torque measurements down here, peak torque measurements that you can monitor through your throws. I think we have even stride length. So good stride length, but once again, that stride length was done or created through a poor transfer of energy. So a stride length is only as effective as the amount of energy you can create through it. So we do want long strides, but we also want the ability to create a lot of energy through it. We don't want long strides killing our ability to create energy. So a lot of good information in here. So check out the ProPlayAI app with the TopVelocity discount code. And I hope this gives you some tools to use it. I hope this gives you a good understanding of this young man's mechanics here, and what he needs to work on really is that lift leg, keeping it back, making the back leg the propeller of energy, and watching that energy move up better to where we have a better finish, more extended front leg, a more internally rotated arm, and then you really start to see a clean delivery and the potential to increase velocity.